Anyway, it's lovely to be here. I love coming to Hong Kong. It's one of my favorite places in the world. And I love talking about artificial intelligence to educators. I've been working in this area for about 30 years now. And for 29 of those years, education didn't really want to know about AI that much. And in the last year, there's been a huge increase in interest. And I'm delighted that that's the case, because I think there's a huge potential benefit that AI can bring to education. But there are also some challenges, and we need to engage educators in sophisticated conversations about how AI should be used in education and how AI should be developed for use in education. So, without further ado, what I'm going to do today is very quickly give you a little bit of definition and history about artificial intelligence, because I think it's really important to contextualize what's happening at the moment in what's happened previously. I thought it was really interesting, Belinda, when you were saying that this time last year, you didn't say anything about AI in your introductory remarks, and now here we are, a whole conference focusing on AI. But of course, it's been around for a long time, and so it's really important to contextualize what's happening now within that broader context. And then I'll look at the way that AI can be used in education. Yes, certainly in that product way, as tools, and the way we use those tools needs to be sophisticated, for sure, but also look at the implications that AI brings for what we want of our education systems. I was really struck, Stuart, by what you said about your children and the way that they're using AI, and they're using it in a sophisticated way to improve what they can produce. And that's really where we are at the moment. This is a call to action for the human race to become smarter, because we've got these technologies that are actually really quite smart. And now we need to make sure that we continue to evolve our human intelligence to be ever smarter. And then I'll finish off with some sort of practical thoughts about the way strategically educators might think about AI, and a little something about ethics, because that's always really important when we're talking about technologies that use data and process that data. So that's what I have in store for you. I'll talk for about 50 minutes, take some questions at the end, and hopefully you'll feel more informed about AI, and I hope you'll feel excited. That's definitely my aim. Okay, so what is AI? Academics working in this space could spend an entire conference, in fact, an entire career debating the definition of AI, but that's not where we are, and we need something useful. Now, I think this definition from the European Commission is useful because it highlights the fact that AI analyzes its environment to make decisions based on that analysis and then produce actions according to goals. So, for example, a piece of AI that I use a lot is speech to text. I'm constantly dictating little notes on my phone or using dictation on my laptop when my fingers have had enough of typing. That's a form of AI. And that's where the environment that the AI is analyzing is the speech, what I'm saying, the sounds, and the goal is for it to translate that speech, that audio, into text on the page. So it acts according to its goals to produce that text based on the environment in which it's interacting. And this definition also recognizes that, of course, AI can be prevalent in software, just like my speech-to-text application on my phone, but also hardware like self-driving cars. So it's quite a nice definition, and it's easy to grasp and useful. But I think what we need to recognize is that although last November was a definite standout moment in the history of AI when ChatGPT was launched, and then after that a whole host of other generative AI applications. And even this last week we've had Google Gemini coming our way with all that promises for multimodal modeling. We'll see. But actually we need to think about where this all started. I think it's hard to pinpoint the exact starting point of artificial intelligence. For centuries, as humans, we've been intrigued by producing likenesses of ourselves as automata, for example. But really, I think you could pick, was it Alan Turing's paper, Can Machines Think? Was it the Dartmouth Conference in 1956, where 12 scientists gathered together in the United States with the mission to analyze all of our cognitive processes, all of the ways in which we think, in such specific detail that we would be able to automate them? Now that sounds crazy now, but those 12 scientists really thought that was possible, and they thought they could make significant progress in a summer. We haven't done that yet, and we're now in 2023, almost 2024. But at the time, that seemed realistic. That's where we were in our thinking about AI. And things have moved on a long way. And if we think about this century, then most of what happened in AI was what's called affectionately good old-fashioned AI. These were rule-based systems where somebody wrote the program code to make the computer behave in a particular sort of way. These systems did not learn. So once you built an intelligent tutoring system that would help a student solve quadratic equations, for example, or a medical diagnostic assistant that would help you diagnose a particular disease, if new information was found about that disease, you'd have to rewrite parts of the program. The AI didn't learn. But it was very smart, and by the end of that century, we had IBM's Deep Blue chess-playing computer that beat Garry Kasparov, the then world grandmaster at chess. Now, I was working in a computer science and AI department when that happened, and quite honestly, we really thought we'd cracked it. People were super excited. Wow, look, AI can now play chess at world-beating level. Intelligent people play chess, therefore we've cracked intelligence. That was absolutely not the case. In actual fact, that period following the Deep Blue victory, if you like, was what's often referred to as an AI winter, because we suddenly realized that actually there were loads of things that humans did that were intelligent that were much harder to simulate and to automate than playing chess. And so we appreciated the fact that we as humans had many sorts of intelligence way beyond the sorts of things that perhaps we'd appreciated when we thought chess was the pinnacle. And so in this century, what we've had is the rise of machine learning. So this is AI that can learn, and this has been a game changer. And one of the fundamental points I think we need to take away with us as we think about AI is the reason that we have these amazing AI systems now, because AI is really good at learning. Humans need to become much, much better at learning if we want to stay ahead of the AI, and that's really important. So we have machine learning systems. But if I just go back, I want to point out something on this slide. 1957, Rosenblatt's perceptron, the first neural network. These really smart machine learning systems are mainly built on neural networks. So even though they're coming to fruition now, in this century, the idea was there in 1957. So we have these really smart technologies, and you can pick your particular favorite moment in the last century. Was it Apple Siri, or was it Alexa, Google Home, whatever kind of AI you use? But please note on this slide also, 2018, we had large language models. We had the basis that is ChatGPT in 2018. So yes, what happened last year was important, but the technology itself didn't come from nowhere. It's built on a huge history, and the specifics of that technology was around in 2018. And it's also the case that AI in education isn't new. So I picked this paper quite specifically because it's dated 9th of July, 2014, because I want to show you how even in education we've had sophisticated AI for a long time. And this paper is about a system called SimSensei that was developed at the University of Southern California. And it's a classic example of the power of different sorts of AI when brought together. So if we look at the screen, we can see a lady sitting in a chair, an avatar playing the role of a student counselor. Now, this is an AI that's been trained on thousands of examples of students counseling interactions from which it has learnt. On the other side of the screen, you can see the student who's having that counselling session in the black and white check shirt. Now, as that student is interacting with the avatar on the screen, the AI system is also capturing data about their facial expression, about what they're saying, how they're speaking, speed, silences, in order to assess how they're feeling today. And then that new information is also fed into the software behind the SimSensei counselling avatar, so that what the counsellor does is informed by information about how this student sitting in front of me is feeling today, as well as the historical training that it's received. So this is a very powerful AI. There's AI behind that analysis of the facial expressions, behind the analysis of what the student's saying, not just the words, but also how they're speaking, and also what the meaning of the way they're not speaking might be integrated. We know that in order to evaluate emotion, the best results come when you have both facial expression and audio data. So, very sophisticated AI, 2014. So we know that these technologies have been around for a while, and they've been around in education for a while. We also know, and you'll hear more about this from Drogan tomorrow, I'm sure, that of course, and Belinda referred to this too, it's not just AI in the software that we're seeing, the intelligent tutoring assistant or the counsellor, as I've just shown. It's also the way that AI can analyse the data that's collected by lots of different sorts of software. And that analysis can tell us so much about the process of learning, not just the product of learning. And we can have dashboards that look at engagement and motivation. The data can be multimodal. This is an image from some work I did some 5 years ago where we had students working together in groups. And we analysed data about their hand movements, their facial expressions, what they were saying. We did eye tracking. And you mix all this data together and you can build a model, in this instance, of the extent to which these students are successfully collaborating as they're solving problems. And of course now, increasingly, we can also collect brain data. Affordable, new devices that can track what's happening at the neural level are also becoming available. And this will be a new data source for AI too. Hence why ethics is such a big part of the conversation whenever we're talking about AI, because this is a really rich data set about anybody that can be captured. And we have the knowledge to analyze that data using AI to start to understand the intricacies and nuances of the way a student is or is not learning, their well-being, how they're feeling. So, huge possibilities. And this is why, of course, we need to get it right. But what is new, and what has caused the storm, is the fact that we have sophisticated AI that's freely available. And this is what ChatGPT launched for us. So it's this scaled technology, and whether it's whatever your flavor of generative AI is, there's lots of them out there. And of course, you can use them for generating content, and they're very useful for individualized feedback. Bing Chat will now have the new Google Gemini multimodal modeling behind it. We'll have to see how that works out and what precisely that means as time goes by. But these are useful technologies, not just for generating text, but I think one of their most useful actions that I certainly use them for is to transform text that already exists. I find this super useful. Taking a text, extracting key information from it, translating it into a different language, translating it into a different format. Lots of different ways that we can use these tools to make our lives easier, to save us time. There's no question about it, they can be useful. And of course, they use images as well as text. But what's really changed in recent years is that, yes, we do have amazingly rich data sets. We wouldn't be able to have these generative AI systems if we didn't have huge amounts of data on which they could be trained. So the fact that we have huge amounts of data is super important. We also have amazing improvements in processing power. When I was a student studying computer science and artificial intelligence back in the 90s, If we wanted to run a program of any size, we had to do it overnight. And my phone has way more processing power than we had at our fingertips then. So this has made a huge difference too. And we've also got really sophisticated algorithms, deep machine learning algorithms that can use that processing power and that data. And now they're easily available and actually really pretty easy to use. When I first saw ChatGPT, it just reminded me of the first time I saw Google as a search engine. There it was, just this little box on a page, and you could type anything in and you'd get an answer. And it was so much simpler than all of the predecessors of search engines that I'd been trying to use. And of course, these systems do produce human-like behavior, and they are useful. They're not the same as humans, as Belinda very wisely pointed out. They are not the same as humans, and that's a key point of the message that I want to convey today. And the landscape's changing very quickly. We've got new legislation coming out of the EU. We've got conversations all over the world about policy, regulation. We've got new products arriving daily. As I say, this week it's Google Gemini. Or actually last week it was Google Gemini. All the time. Are you using AI? Yes, I bet you're using AI. In fact, Stuart referred to one of these tools, at least one of these tools, when you were talking. We're all using AI, even if we don't recognize it as AI, and we have been for quite a long time. But what are the implications of all of this for AI, and how do we as educators leverage these powerful technologies? Well, I find it useful to look at this situation through three lenses. Now, these three lenses are not mutually exclusive. They are connected. But it's a very complex situation, so it's useful to have these three lenses, I find. The first one is looking at AI as tools we can use to help us in our teaching, to help students in their learning. The second is the implications of AI for human intelligence and the way that we need to rethink what our human intelligence is all about and how we become much, much, much smarter. And the third one is about empowering people by helping them to understand enough about AI to use it effectively and safely. But as I say, they're all interconnected because the more you use the AI, the more you understand it, and the more you can see the implications that it brings, for example. So, using AI, the tools, yep, there's loads of them out there, and I'm sure you're trying many of these. Again, just a very few examples. You can see the man in a T-shirt on one side of the screen. That's another avatar-based system. It's an English language teaching system called N-Skills from a company called Alelo in the US. And again, it's a conversational AI. So it's using lots of different sorts of AI. You have a conversation with this character. You don't need to use the keyboard. You can chat. That's a huge, I think, important step. It takes the keyboard away, which for some people can be a bit of a barrier to interaction. So you have a conversation, and the avatar responds in a way to help improve your speaking and listening of English. Or you have platforms like Century Tech, which is an adaptive platform that adapts to the needs of individual students and produces information for teachers. We have systems like Carnegie Learning, which have been around for decades, that are very well-designed, intelligent tutoring support systems. And we have tools like Synaptic, quite the opposite end of the spectrum, a small startup from the UK that's using AI to help the assessment process. And then a whole battery of these tools that I'm sure many of you are using. And these are just examples of the kinds of tools that are out there that you can use to support yourself as a teacher and to support learners. But I can't stress strongly enough the importance of what Belinda was saying about going beyond the product, thinking about how we integrate AI in our thinking about teaching and learning, in our strategies, in our policies, in the way we are as educators, beyond the products. But certainly, these AI tools can be very helpful with adaptive, personalized feedback, learning paths, automated grading, adaptive assessment, so that you can help speed up the assessment process, so somebody who's more advanced doesn't need to answer all of the first preliminary questions, they can move on to the more advanced ones. AI-powered dashboards and learner analytics, which I know Dragan will say more about tomorrow. Content generation for students, that can save us time. And teaching assistants. And this last one's really the point. I think we have to see AI as our assistant, because that's what it should be. The human educator is invaluable and unreplaceable, and they need to see the AI as their assistant that they use to help them become the best educator they can possibly become. So that notion of assistant is important, and I think it's extremely important with these generative AI tools. I like to think of the generative AI tools I use as a really fast research assistant who needs their work checked. Go off, do lots and lots of useful things, but I always need to have oversight and make sure that it's correct, and give them guidance. Now, this second lens is the one that I think is the most important, because this will be the real game changer. And this is about increasing our human intelligence. Now, I wrote this book in 2017. It was published in 2018. Don't be overly influenced by the small child on the cover. It's not just about young children. It's about learners of all ages. And I wrote it because I was concerned that we were undervaluing our human intelligence, and as a result, viewing our artificial intelligence as being more intelligent than it really was. So the point of writing the book was to differentiate between human and artificial intelligence. And it feels more relevant now than it did when it was published in 2018. It's also published in Mandarin by Cheers, but this English version went out of copyright this year, so I decided just to make it free. So if you want a copy, you can download a copy. I think these slides will be shared with you, but you can download a copy from that link, because I really want people to understand the importance of the difference between artificial and human intelligence, because I think that's the thing that will help us make the right decisions about how we use AI, how we influence the way AI is developed. Now, in about 3 minutes, I can't tell you the entirety of the book, so I'm going to try and summarize what I learned about human intelligence from reading across multiple different disciplinary areas: psychology, sociology, education, also computer science, of course, and AI. But I reached the conclusion that actually our human intelligence was a complex, interwoven whole, not a set of separate intelligences, but it was useful to think of this complex, interwoven whole as having different elements. Now, I was definitely influenced by Howard Gardner's wonderful work on multiple intelligences, but this is slightly different in that these are different elements of this complex whole. And some of them can be done by AI, and some of them can't. So we have our interdisciplinary academic intelligence. That's what education has traditionally been very much about, although I think interdisciplinarity has become more respected in recent years. That's very accessible to AI. You know, AI, as we are seeing, can pass any of the sorts of exams that we traditionally set. Then there's meta-knowing intelligence. Now, meta-knowing is often used to mean metacognition, but that's not what I mean here. What I mean here is epistemic cognition. What do I, as a learner, understand knowledge to be? Where does it come from? And this is fundamentally important in order to help us make good decisions about what we believe is true and what we believe is false, which is ever harder, isn't it just? Now, back in the 1960s, Perry did some very interesting work with undergraduate students at Harvard. Harvard, top university, you would expect those undergraduates to have very sophisticated personal epistemologies, but they didn't. And that's not unusual. They definitely saw knowledge as something that would be exposed to them through their education, something that would be given to them. They didn't really see it as something that they needed to construct for themselves by engaging with different perspectives, forming different views for themselves. What did they believe? What didn't they believe? So this meta-knowing, this epistemic cognition is super important in increasing our understanding of what knowledge is and helping us to differentiate truth from fiction. Again, that is fairly accessible to AI. And then we have social intelligence. For people like me, who love the psychology of Vygotsky, social interaction is all. That's how we learn. But social interaction is supremely important, and social intelligence is important. We only have to look at the pandemic to see how, in order to tackle that immense challenge, people had to work together effectively. They had to be socially intelligent as well as intelligent across multiple disciplines. And again, to an extent, AI can do some of this. It can be an effective team player, even if it doesn't have the emotions itself to understand the people it's interacting with. And then on the other side of the screen are a lot of meta-intelligences. Now, these are not accessible to AI, and this is where I think we need to focus our attention. So when I say meta-intelligence, I mean meta in our uniquely human ability to reflect on our own thought processes, our own emotions, our own experience of the world. So, of course, metacognition, which you'll all be familiar with, helps us to plan, helps us to regulate, helps us to monitor. Meta-subjective is about understanding our emotional intelligence, the extent to which we're developing it, the extent to which the people we are interacting with have emotional intelligence. How do we need to alter the way we interact with them because of where they are and where we are? Meta-contextual intelligence. And this is the one I think we underestimate at our cost. This is the one that reminds me of the IBM Deep Blue chess-playing computer moment when those of us working in computer science departments had this really quite immense realization. Things like being able to see was so much harder than playing chess, and yet we had completely underestimated it when we were thinking about intelligent behaviors. So meta-contextual intelligence is the intelligence that allows us to move most of the time seamlessly through the world. I've never stood on this stage before. I know how stages work. I know you're the audience, I'm the presenter. If I suddenly go up there on the camera deck and start playing with the camera, you'd think, that's a bit odd, isn't it? That's not how we behave in this situation. So, and I arrive in Hong Kong, I can interact with different people, do different things. That requires huge amounts of intelligence. And we just take it for granted. But you've only got to look at the difficulty we've had in developing self-driving cars, and they're only trying to drive, complex as that is, to realize how amazingly complex this is and how much intelligence it uses. And then there's perceived self-efficacy. Now, accurate perceived self-efficacy is what we're all striving for, isn't it? Because this means that we are highly intelligent and we also know ourselves incredibly well. We can set goals, know how likely we are to achieve them, know what we need to learn and do in order to achieve them, who can help us, how best do we interact with people, how best do we learn, how are we going to get there, how are we going to achieve them. And so it's those meta-intelligences, the ones in orange on the bottom, that are not available to AI. Yes, we do have metacognitive AI. If you saw a human behaving in this way, you wouldn't call it metacognition. It's so embryonic that we wouldn't recognize it as metacognitive behavior. So these are still largely inaccessible to AI. So that's where we need to focus our attention. So I think as we move forward, and this is a piece of work I did for the OECD, which I think probably will be published at the beginning of this year, about different ways of thinking about education systems, and in particular assessment. Numeracy and literacy we'll always need. I don't think we should ever see them as dispensable. And they're interconnected, of course. But then I think there are these three blocks that we really need to focus attention on. Yeah, we do need everybody to have AI literacy. Otherwise, they are just going to be hugely taken advantage of by tech companies who want to make money, putting it bluntly. Also, they won't be able to leverage these technologies to their benefit safely. Then we need learning mastery that calls on all of those meta-intelligences that makes people good at learning. Remember I said a while ago that the reason AI has got to where it's got to is largely because it's really good at learning. And so we need to be supremely good at learning so that we can face any challenge that comes our way and deal with uncertainty. And then we need knowledge mastery. We need to know what knowledge is. We need knowledge of the world. We need knowledge of ourselves. And we need knowledge of others. And so I think these then need to be set within the traditional disciplines. Of course, they're still important. We can't dispense with history and geography and physics and maths. They're super important. But they need to be the medium through which we develop these literacy and mastery elements so that we can really make sure that at this moment we recognize that it's all about human intelligence. What's happening with AI is a call to action, to recognize the fact that our human intelligence is not a finished work. We're still evolving. We can still become smarter, and we must become smarter if we want to stay ahead of the AI. And of course, as ever with these things, they're interconnected. And if I take something like metacognition, AI can really help us. So AI is the cause that's precipitated the need for us to rethink what education is, how we assess people, how we teach, what we teach. But it's also part of the solution. So if I take something like metacognition and we break it down, now this is an incomplete diagram quite deliberately because I've just picked a tiny part of metacognition. So at the high level, we can think of declarative metacognition. I am aware of my thinking processes. I can talk about them. I know I am aware of them. And procedural, kinds of activities that we can do that reveal that we have some metacognition, even if we can't explicitly talk about it. Things like planning, regulation, monitoring, control, reflection, super important, as you will all know as educators. And the procedural develops ahead of the declarative, because obviously metacognition is something we develop as we grow, as we age. But if I just look at the kinds of digital traces that we can collect that help us identify small steps towards those micro components of metacognition. Now, of course, I'm not saying that if somebody highlights and annotates, they're definitely self-regulating. But if we get lots and lots of these little evidence points, these digital traces that we can add together and analyze, we can start to build a picture of the way in which the individual who is completing these actions is developing these elements of metacognition. So AI can help us build a model from these digital traces that helps us to understand how an individual, it might be ourselves, one of our students, all of our students, is developing these subcomponents of metacognition. And of course, the same is true of many other cognitive and metacognitive and meta-intelligent processes. So AI can help us as we strive to develop that mastery of learning and that mastery of knowledge. And it's really important that we do, because there's a risk, I think, at the moment, that rather than seeing this as an opportunity for us to become smarter, we see it as an opportunity for us to offload the things we find hard to the technology. I mean, let's be honest. If somebody comes along to you and says, you know that thing you find really hard that makes your brain hurt when you're doing it? You don't have to do that anymore. I'll do that for you. It's very tempting, isn't it? Very, very tempting. And I think for students who are struggling, it's even more tempting. I think that's a big mistake. We know from ongoing research that the way that our brains remember is changing, largely due to things like Google. We know our ability to navigate the world is changing because of our use of GPS. Maybe that doesn't matter, maybe it does. That's a very interesting topic for debate. But my point here is, if we inappropriately offload important cognitive processes to AI, we will stop being able to do them. And I think, therefore, we need to recognize this fact and make wise decisions about what we do offload onto AI and what we don't. Because we need to make sure these are things we're happy not to be able to do in the future. And for our students and our children not to be able to do in the future. So we need to make wise decisions about offloading. And of course that's difficult because the impetus will come from big tech companies who want to make lots of money out of AI. And there's going to be a battle, there's no question about it, which is why it's really important that educators are at the forefront of the conversations. Now, as part of that book, that I told you about machine learning and human intelligence, there's a chapter in that book called Who Moved My Cheese? And it's based on this human development book. It was a bestseller, helping companies to deal with organizational change. And I was really struck by this book when I looked at it. Basically, it's the story of 2 mice and 2 humans who live in a cheese maze. And they wake up one morning and discover all their cheese is gone. And they all react in different ways. So the mice just scurry off because they're sure that if they go and look in the rest of the maze, there'll be some more cheese. And the 2 humans react in very different ways. One of them just becomes increasingly belligerent and grumpy. How dare they move my cheese? Nobody had the right to move my cheese. My union said they shouldn't move the cheese, blah, 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 blah. And the other human realizes that they could do that, but it's not actually going to get them anywhere. So they decide to go off and look, to go off and look for more cheese. And as they go about it, they write little messages for their companion in case the companion does decide to move and look for more cheese, to change. And indeed, he goes back to try and help his belligerent companion, but it doesn't work. But he writes these messages on the cave. Change happens. They keep moving the cheese, etc., etc. Change, move with the cheese. So I, at this time, translated them for Who Moved My Brain, my intelligence, because I was concerned even then about this offloading. And I really think this is the key. So when it says there, intelligence tastes good, that's supremely important. As educators, we all know it, don't we? When you help a student succeed at something they've been struggling with, you see the pleasure, the achievement in their face. You know. As learners ourselves, I remember when I was studying computer science and AI, and it was in my first term, and I was told I would build a compiler. This was great. I didn't know what a compiler was. I had no idea what a compiler was, and I was going to build one in one term. Whoa! That was the steepest learning curve I've ever been through. I was so satisfied when I built my compiler and it ran. It was just the best moment, because I never believed I'd be able to do it. But I did. And it tasted so good. So this notion of become ever more intelligent is super important. It tastes good to be really intelligent, and we need to do that. And of course, the other sayings there are all about these machines are going to get more and more intelligent. It's not going to change in that respect. Well, it is going to change. It's just going to change to become more intelligent. It's not going away. So we have to move with it. We don't have a choice. Now that third lens, learning about AI. Now this, I'm hoping you'll be able to do. Please, please have a go at it. We've had a little technical hitch in that I'm not sure. We haven't been able to make the live connection to Mentimeter, so it's unlikely you're going to see the results today. But I promise this afternoon, or this evening, when I next get to my laptop, I will upload them onto my LinkedIn profile, and so you will see them. But basically, this is a set of questions I've been asking people all over the world, well, mainly Asia, Pacific, Australia, in the last few months. And it's really interesting, the responses. And, for example, it'll be interesting to see if the results here align. Most people feel okay using AI technologies for themselves, for their preparation. Very few people feel happy using it in the high-stakes environment of the classroom, which I think is interesting. And a major concern is safeguarding, which reminds me of the pandemic. In the pandemic, every school I spoke to in the UK said the major concern for them was safeguarding. And none of the edtech companies were addressing that specifically at the outset. There was a real mismatch between what people were really worried about and the assistance they were receiving. And it seems like safeguarding is a really key issue here as well. So, as I've been saying throughout this talk, it's really important that educators are at the forefront of the conversations about what happens with AI, how it's regulated, what kinds of AI we allow companies to develop, we encourage them to develop. In order to do that, we need an educated education population. So we need training for staff, we need training for students, and we need effective policy and strategy. Because there are huge opportunities and challenges. We need to work out what the competencies are that educators need in order to help them really leverage AI. And we have some ideas about that. We need to think about teacher training. How do we help early years teachers, sorry, that's the wrong way of phrasing it, new teachers and early years teachers engage with AI and leverage it? How can educational organizations plan strategically, develop the right policies? And what will the impact be on the teaching profession? Because I think we do need to see it at that level. And this is where I move on to thoughts about strategy, about how we tackle this strategically. Because I think certainly we need to address the noise that is generative AI, because it's there, students are using it, we need to have policies, we need to have approaches, we need to help educators use it, understand it, etc. But there's a much bigger job of work to be done here about AI in general and how, exactly as Belinda was saying, it's integrated in an effective way to improve teaching and learning. So strategically, I think it's important that there are sector-level responses and sector-level leadership. So actually organizations like AISC, COBIS, all of these organizations that bring together organizations can be super helpful in this respect. Institutions need AI strategies, and certainly I think there's huge possibilities for proportionate strategy making to bring about economies and to bring about improvements, increased engagement, addressing issues like well-being as well as things like academic achievement. And then supremely important, this capacity building point, because capacity building will be the thing that makes a difference to an institution. If educators and students are able to leverage AI effectively, that will impact primarily on the way that that organization is able to deal with it. And if you're thinking about a strategy, I think there are 4 key elements. Initially, you need to be driven by your vision, of course. Now, it may be that your existing vision is perfectly fine. It may not need changing because of AI. But the way that you achieve it is likely to need changing because of AI, because AI will likely be able to help you achieve that vision more quickly, more effectively, more pleasantly, in different ways. And then I think you need to think about these 4 elements, and of course they're interconnected. Governance and ethics, supremely important. You know, how are you going to set the parameters for how these technologies are used within the school? How can they be explored, tested, evaluated? And then iterative applications, picking use cases in different parts of an institution and testing them out. And then there's the technical infrastructure and data. What kind of state is that in? And then there's the staff capacity. Who understands this technology? Who can use it? And both of those speak specifically to how you make the decision about that iterative unit application. Which are you going to do first? Which is going to be your first case study for AI is highly likely to be influenced by the technology, the data, and the human capacity. Inevitably, over the years, I've done multiple evaluations of schools' digital infrastructures, edtech infrastructures. But whenever we do it, we always insist on doing the human resource evaluation as well. Because invariably, in every school where I've done this, you discover there are technologies that nobody's using because somebody brought them in because they were enthusiastic about them 5 years ago. They've left, and you're still paying for the license, but nobody knows how to use it. So you need to map the technology to the people who know how to use it. It's super important. And these are some of the questions that you might find yourself asking as you're doing this strategic development work with your institution. You know, do we really need to understand AI? Why? What does that mean for us? Because what I think is really important is that however you engage with AI, it's purpose-driven. And that purpose is an educational one. Don't be overly influenced by the hype, by what, I know I'm standing here in a huge exhibition hall with lots of products for sale, but don't be over-influenced by what sales people are telling you. Think about what purpose is important to your institution, and that should drive the way that you use AI. As I say, I'll share these slides so you'll have more time to look at them, and I'm always happy for people to contact me afterwards because we never have enough time. So finally, we have to think about ethics. Now, back in 2018, I was really lucky to co-found the Institute for Ethical AI and Education in the UK with Sir Anthony Selden, who some of you might know. He's now principal at Epsom College in the UK. He's the only educator that I know of who's been a school leader and a university leader, because he was Vice-Chancellor of the University of Buckingham at the time that we did this work. And the work of the Institute was to produce a report, which is there, again, freely downloadable via that link, that was designed to help educators understand how to procure AI. So if you were thinking about bringing AI into an organization, here are some questions you should ask yourself. So basically, it's set out like this over 4 pages with objectives, criteria, and a checklist. So you can literally go through it. Each of the questions on the checklist, ask yourself, am I doing this? Are we doing this as an organization? Oh, I need to ask the person who's trying to sell me this AI this question to see if that's true for them. So it's a very practical guide. And although it was developed before the existence of ChatGPT, it's still relevant. The questions are still relevant because they're very general about AI. So to conclude, I think there's no question AI is increasingly ubiquitous. It's not going anywhere other than appearing more and more and more. We have to engage with it, and everybody needs to understand it. We don't need everybody to understand it technically so that they can build it. A few people need to do that, but most people don't. They need to know what it is, the basics of how it works, what it can do, what it can't do. We need educational organizations to have a strategic plan for how they engage with AI so that they can leverage it to their best effect. And capacity building is a fundamental part of that for each institution, but also for the sector, to make sure that the education sector has a loud and clear voice in all of these discussions that we're seeing around AI, which are being far too driven by big tech companies in Silicon Valley at the moment. We need education and educators to lead the way. Now, if you'd like to know any more, I wrote this book called AI for School Teachers with a couple of colleagues, one of whom is an award-winning school teacher herself, Karine George, and the other, a lovely colleague, Luka Korova. This is not freely available, I'm afraid, but 2 chapters are freely available as audio chapters, and there's a link there to download them. Also, if you're interested in AI CPD for schools, Educate Ventures Research has a lot of different resources, some of them paid for, some of them free, that you can access via this QR code. Please feel free to do that. Thank you for listening to me. As I've said, I will put on my LinkedIn profile the results of that Mentimeter so you can see, and I might actually put a couple of the other ones I've done recently so you can see a comparison, because it's been fascinating. The team at Educate Ventures Research, most of whom are data scientists and AI folk, not all, but most, are fascinated when we see the data coming in from all of these Mentimeters by how the numbers are not identical, but the pattern, the shape on that visualization is the same. So universal concerns, but also universal interest, which I think is great. I think there's time for a couple of questions, which I'd love to take, but if you can't think of a question in the moment, feel free to contact me afterwards. I will do my best to respond to you. Thank you very much for listening today.
Thank you.